Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me fine? Great. Welcome to our spokes-public meeting on cycling and wider transport policy in the new Edinburgh Council. Our meeting is also part of the Climate Fringe Festival, for which there is a link in our website article about tonight's meeting. The meeting is being recorded and it will be on our YouTube channel, which you can find on our website under the video tab. If you are tweeting about tonight's meeting, please use the hashtag #SpokesMTG. So this is our first in-person public meeting since November 2019, but we're pleased also to welcome those who are still watching on the old-fashioned online method. I'm doing an introduction and then we'll hear from our speaker, Cllr Scott Arthur, the Council's new Transport Convener. I remember when Scott was first elected as a councillor, soon after he turned up at one of our spokes public meetings just to sit in the audience. I'm pleased to say there's at least one other councillor, new councillor, doing the same today. And Scott even offered to help at the stall at the back of the meeting. Today he's here in person again. And so, of course, being in person, we had to find him a seat. So we decided to put him in the hot seat. Sorry about that. I'm sure as a politician, he's quite used to being in the hot seat. But just in case there is any wriggling out of tricky questions, we also have Kirsty Lewin from Spokes-Porty to keep him well pinned down. Kirsty will hold a discussion with Scott based on your questions. And we're hoping for questions on policy issues such as how to make space for cycling, how to end project delays, how to reduce car use, etc., rather than too many questions on individual schemes where other members of the audience may not be familiar with the location that you're talking about. So Martin has given me 10 minutes to set the scene. A huge amount has happened since our 2019 meeting. Admittedly, not quite on the scale of COVID or war or a change of monarch or prime minister. But who would have thought that within 18 months of that meeting, we would have 40 kilometres of semi-protected bike lane on major roads in the city, especially when previous bike projects took years not to happen. Although at last we do have the start of one major on-road project, the city centre west-east route, CC Well. Or who would have thought that the Scottish Government would promise to raise the proportion of their transport budgets going to active travel from 3% to 10% by 2024, with the rising cash already starting to filter through to councils. Sadly, however, another big change was the collapse of Edinburgh's bike hire scheme, although they continue to flourish in other cities. Finally, there has been a big growth in Edinburgh in local voluntary activities supporting active travel. For example, groups called Southwest 20, Best Edinburgh, Blackford Safe Routes, several school bike buses, and our own Spokes-Porty. We're also seeing increasing presence of cargo bikes for local family and business transport, thanks to initiatives such as Cargo Bike Movement, Laid Back Bikes, and David from Laid Back is here if you want to talk to him about that after the meeting. And of course, our own grants to assist community organisations who need a cargo bike. Another big change this year was the council election, which gives a whole new context to how decisions are made. It's really important to understand this. In Edinburgh, we have been used to coalitions of two parties, SNP and Labour, or Labour and Lib Dem, which together formed a majority and negotiated an agreed programme, usually with tacit Green support on active travel. Having a majority, these coalitions had no need to compromise with other parties. Conversely, the other parties tended to act as an opposition, which could complain, but not change anything and not have to take any responsibility. The new council, however, instead of a majority coalition, voted in a minority Labour administration, just 13 councillors out of 63. Thus, there is no agreed overall programme or manifesto which commands a majority in the council. Whilst Labour will obviously attempt to implement their manifesto, the reality in the Transport Committee is that no party can achieve anything without the support or at least abstention by 3 of the 5 parties. Some people feared this might lead to paralysis or to mediocrity, but instead the signs, at least going by the first Transport Committee, which was on the 1st of September, the signs look good for cross-party cooperation to combine the best ideas from each party on an issue-by-issue basis. For example, there was a debate on spaces for people, with motions from various parties, and it was not clear at first whether the Labour or the Green motion would win out. The Greens then agreed to incorporate a couple of important points from the Labour motion on implications for climate and implications for buses. And that motion then won out. So it resulted, in our view, in what you could call a best of both worlds outcome. An example of minority working at the full council was on the workplace parking levy, where the SNP, Lib Dems and Greens combined to outvote a more sceptical Labour position and instruct officers to look further into the options. It will be very interesting to hear Cllr Arthur's views, not specifically on the motion, but how far the administration will work consensually on issues where it is outvoted. Of course, we cannot know the future, but perhaps we can get a clue from the first Transport Committee, where Cllr Arthur began by stating his top personal motivations as convener. It's great to see staff well-being included. It's often not appreciated how tough it is for officers who are not politicians when they're faced by angry people who don't want their car privileges reduced, or indeed by a few social media cycling activists who use insults rather than argument. Secondly, the importance of net zero cannot be underestimated, as we can see from the ever-increasing litany of climate disasters, together with their ever-increasing impact on food supply, living conditions, and the world economy. Whilst Britain was changing its Prime Minister and its monarch, literally millions of people lost their homes in Pakistan's flooding catastrophe. Over 1,000 died. The Indus River became a 60-mile wide lake that's further than Edinburgh to Glasgow, and 7,000 square miles of agricultural land were destroyed. The UK is fortunate in being in a temperate zone, but nonetheless is far from immune to global heating. This summer's heat wave resulted in several urban mini wildfires in and around London, with 41 homes and other properties destroyed on one day in July. All this is happening with a rise in average global temperatures of just 1.1 degrees. Yet we're now virtually certain to reach 1.5, with subsequent rises dependent on what we do now. On traffic reduction, in December 2020, the Scottish Government, as part of its climate plans, committed to cutting car kilometres in Scotland 20% by 2030, though we've not yet seen any serious action resulting. A year later, November 2021, Edinburgh Council, being an urban area, set an even higher target to reduce car kilometres 30% by 2030. Such tough targets need early action and messaging, but in fact the opposite message is being given to the public by road capacity expansion plans such as Sheriff Hall roundabouts. And while this is largely funded by the Scottish Government, local councils have not disagreed. Government and councils are emphasising the improvement of sustainable and active transport as the means to achieve traffic reduction. But there's plenty evidence that traffic reduction also requires measures which make driving less attractive. And indeed, in order to achieve the promised high-quality alternatives of bike routes, bus lanes, and wider footways, space has to be reallocated away from motor traffic, whether parked or moving. So, in summary, Cllr Arthur really is in the hot seat if he is to achieve his and indeed our ambitions. But I'm hoping we'll leave the meeting feeling that things really are going to happen. Finally, on a personal note, these are some of the issues that I hope we will see clarified in the rest of the meeting. While you look at them, I'll just make a couple of announcements before passing over. I'll mention a few events. There are links to all these events on the Spokes website if you look in the events column. Tomorrow, the monthly Critical Mass ride will be a Kiddical Mass as part of World Kiddical Mass Weekend, open to everyone, but particularly suitable for children and families. On Thursday, between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m, there's a council drop-in at the Bio Quarter with information about new routes in that area. We would love to have a Spokes stall there, and we've been offered space, but we haven't found any volunteers. If you could run a stall from 11 till 2 on Thursday, please let us know at the end of the meeting. Further on in the future, Friday the 4th of November is the next Infrasisters ride, calling for safer conditions for cycling at night. Kirsty from Spokes Porty is one of the organisers of that. At the end of the meeting, do go to our stalls at the back. We've got maps, our Spokes maps of Edinburgh and the 3 Lothians councils at special stall prices. And if you're not a Spokes member, please do consider joining. You'll get a roughly monthly email circular, similar to the yellow ones which are on your seats today, telling about cycling developments, events, and suggestions for contacting your councillors. There's no membership fee, although donations are welcome. And if you're watching online, as I understand quite a lot of people are, you can use the membership tab on our website to join. So thank you very much, and I'll now pass over to Kirsty and Scott.
No one clapped. You can clap for Dave. Thanks, Dave. So Cllr Arthur is going to speak now for as long as he likes. If he goes on too long, you can start wriggling in your seats. If it's too short, I'm sure we can ask a lot more questions once he's stopped. So if you just be polite and let him speak, please, and then we'll take questions at the end. And we've got some written questions that have already come in online. So if you're here and you've asked them, I'll ask you to identify yourself so that you can ask it yourself. And if you're not here, I'll ask on your behalf, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. We'll do it in themes, as Dave said, and we don't want to spend too much time on individual schemes, so we'll keep that fairly short. So over to you.
Thank you, and thank you to David, and thank you for inviting me along this evening. So if you don't mind, I'll talk a little bit about myself first, because that's my favourite topic, and we can move on to less interesting things. So my outside the council, I'm a civil engineer, and I wasn't going to mention this actually, but a big part of what we do, or what I do, is flood risk management, particularly in urban areas. And in the 20 years, this links to what David was saying, in the I'm getting old now, 25 years since I graduated, we went from climate change being something in my field, in urban water management, has been something that we had to prepare for, and we added little percentages here and there to cover it. And what we find now in 2022 is what we were doing back in 2000 wasn't enough. And back then we were adding 10% to designs. Now we're way over that, and we see. Whilst I never think it's right to associate individual events with climate change, I think the trends are pretty clear. And whilst we see that in Pakistan, as David highlighted, and I can remember the last floods in Pakistan back in 2010, because somebody in my group was actually doing modelling there, 3D modelling on quite a large scale. What we see in Edinburgh now is almost every summer we have intense events which cause quite a lot of problems for people. And a couple of weeks ago I was speaking to residents who didn't flood in my ward but came very close to it. And so I understand that climate change is a real thing, and I see the impacts in my ward and at my work. I see the impacts across the world. So it is a very real thing. We do have to respond to it, and we have to respond to it in all aspects of our lives, I think. Not just in terms of transport, which I do think often we focus too much on transport as being the key to tackling climate change, and it is obviously one of the biggest emitters. But we also have to think about how we heat our homes as well, and the products we consume too. It's about that bigger picture. Anyway, that's the sermon over. So I've cycled most of my life, apart from the 5 years when I was doing my undergraduate degree. For some reason I didn't cycle then. Not quite sure why, but I've cycled all my life. And I would say that whilst a lot of people, they cycle because of climate change, for me it's always been a health and well-being thing. Back in 2015 I had heart surgery, and cycling was a big part of my recovery. Cycling and the park run, I have to say, big parts of my recovery. And so that's really why I cycle rather than climate change, although I fully understand the climate benefits. So typically I cycle about 300 kilometres a month. I checked today, I've done 211.8 so far, and there'll be another 6 on top of that on the way home tonight. So for me, cycling is just an everyday thing. I cycle most days. It's largely because I'm disorganised and lazy. I can get to places quicker, and I can get there at my own timetable as well. So I use it to go to work, go to meetings, go to meet people, the whole gambit of things. And I think I said I was at the Edinburgh Cycling Festival. I see Brendan's here, and I said then, it came to me there, that for me having a bike is just really like having a pair of shoes. You use it to go places, and that's it. It's not really about, certainly at my age, it's not about speed or sport or anything like that. It's just really a tool. When I was younger, I did the coast-to-coast route in England, Western Isles in Scotland, Great Glen, cycled right across the Netherlands a few times, Belgium, France, I think Luxembourg at some point, but I'm not quite sure. And probably my favourite place where I ever cycled was Austria. And that was on hire bikes, actually, which David mentioned a few minutes ago. I had a fantastic time cycling along the Danube Canal there. And like most cyclists in Edinburgh, I have to admit in this forum, my wife and I, we share a car in our house as well. And there's 4 adults in my house, 4 alleged adults, I should say. And we've got, I think, 7 bikes in our garage. We had 8 a couple of weeks ago, but one of them made it to the bike station, and I think another 3 are going to follow that one quite soon, I think. So 7 bikes, a car, and I think 2 bus passes, and lots of pairs of shoes. So transport is about choice, I think. It's about, so we're lucky, we do have that choice. We live on just off a fantastic bus route. Cycling's reasonably good where we are, it's not fantastic. And walking's very good. So it's about choice. And for me, the choice aspect is really important, because it's about making sure people have a choice, but it's also about making sure people are aware that they have that choice. And I think that's often an issue. People are stuck in habits, and perhaps they don't look at things from a different perspective. So I think that's a really important point. So back to the convenership job. So it's a huge honour for me to be Transport Convener in Edinburgh. Back in May, when the election happened, I dream about all sorts of things, but I've never dreamt about being the Transport Convener, I have to say. And it was through a bizarre set of circumstances, none of which I could have predicted, that I ended up being Transport Convener. I didn't expect we would have a minority administration in Edinburgh. 13 out of 63 councillors. It really is a minority. And I didn't expect that once it looked like we were going to take control, I didn't expect to have any convenerships, because I think people that know me as a councillor will know that I'm really happy just being quite low profile, humble backbench councillor, getting on with stuff in my ward. So it's been quite interesting, that switch to obviously still focusing my ward, which, to be honest, in a lot of ways is, well, in almost every way, is the most rewarding part of the job, is working with local people, making a difference to their everyday lives. But also taking on the job of convenership, which is really interesting. And I'm largely still coming to terms with the job, and I still make lots of mistakes. But thankfully, Edinburgh, and Twitter in particular, is quite a forgiving place. So there's lots of space for me to make those mistakes and learn from them. But I do take responsibility for the job and all that happens within that domain. And that's why I think Martin, when he invited me along here tonight, I think he asked me about 3 times if I would bring an officer with me. And firstly, it's about that wellbeing thing. I didn't think it was right to ask an officer to come out on a Friday night, a council officer, to come along and help me answer questions. And secondly, I think it's important that people understand the limit in my understanding of this job, rather than me having to have an officer by my side helping me with each of the questions. So I thought it was important I came along myself here tonight. So the job is quite varied, and I took a note. I had a look at my diary today just to talk about to look at the meetings I've had this week, not the things I've done, but the meetings I've had this week. And I'll just run through these very quickly. So I had discussions with Lothian Buses about changes to bus services in North Leith. There's lots of issues there. Full Council yesterday, we got the CPZ, Controlled Parking Zone Phase 1, across the line, and that's the first of a lot of this work that's going to be coming through the committee. Is really important. And I have to mention that that's actually one of our manifesto commitments, was to deliver that. So that's that done. So that was yesterday. Had a meeting with the Transport Minister, the Scottish Government Transport Minister. I think that was on, I forget the days, on Wednesday, I think, to speak about the low emission zone and the work we're doing there in Edinburgh. And I think, obviously this is getting rolled out right across Scotland cities, but I think Edinburgh is in a really strong position compared to other cities in terms of LEZ, particularly because we've got a council-owned bus fleet, which is already fully low emission zone compliant. And Lothian Buses is completely bought into that process, which is fantastic. So we did good discussions there about how it's progressing in Edinburgh, and also about the need for revenue funding from the Scottish Government to help us operate that service in the longer term. But we do have £1 million from Transport Scotland to help us with some of the infrastructure changes we'll have to make over the next year or two. The same day, I had interviews with STV, BBC and Radio 4th to talk about the safety improvements we're making along the existing live tram line, and that was largely about the protection for cyclists. Radio 4th is quite important because my mum listens to that, so I have to make sure I never refuse interviews with Radio 4th. I also met Transport Scotland the same day, and we spent time there talking about extension to the tram in Edinburgh and our 30% vehicle kilometre reduction and our plans for that, and also the Scottish Government's plans, which David, he mentioned there, so I don't have to go over that. And the same day, I also spoke to Historic Environment Scotland about their road network in Edinburgh and how the council interfaces with that. And then the day ended on Wednesday with talking to I think his title is Managing Director of Transport for Edinburgh, our plans to integrate public transport in a much more coherent way in Edinburgh. And that was a really positive discussion, actually, about how to take that forward in the coming year, where we're going to see quite big changes about how Edinburgh trams, Lothian buses, how they're integrated into a single entity. And while I'm there, a little known fact is that the MD of Transport for Edinburgh, he spent quite a long time over the last 2 or 3 years developing the plan for what, for the Queen's death in Scotland and how that would unfold. And it's not a widely known thing, but it was actually the MD of Transport for Edinburgh who's done a lot of that planning, and that really paid off in Edinburgh over the last week or two, which has been excellent for the city, actually, that went so well, given how important it was. And today, if you don't mind, Kirsty, I'll spend.
I'm hoping you're going to talk about cycling quite soon. Yeah.
All these things are connected. All these things are connected. So today, this morning, we had the meeting of CESTRAN to talk about regional transport strategy. And so what was agreed this morning was the final version of the transport strategy for the region around Edinburgh, basically. And what's really important there is that the focus there is low carbon and car use reduction. It's about realising that parking is part of the way of managing that, and I'll touch on that later. And what we got at a regional scale was Edinburgh's target to reduce car use by 30% enshrined at that regional scale. And Kirsty's right, that's not a cycling issue, but that's really important for setting the environment for cycling in the city. And we also got buy-in for our plans to extend a tram line, and that being a regional asset. And that's important because once these things once the tram becomes regional, then it becomes eligible for Scottish Government funding to help us deliver that new line from Granton out to the Royal Infirmary, which is going to be transformative. We also spoke about behavioural change and about the need to put alternatives in place for people, for it to enable them to change their behaviour. So that was about public transport access, about reallocating road space at a regional level to extend the bus lane network, about the strategic regional active travel routes, and about seamless multi-mode journeys. And CESTRAN, they've obviously involves the local authorities, involves Edinburgh and the local authority around it. They actually have a bike for hire scheme for East Lothian, which is working really well, and they're integrating that into an app they have to enable those multi-mode journeys to work. And whilst, if you look at the app, it's a little bit clunky, that there's real potential there. And I think, whilst Edinburgh thinks it always knows best within that region sometimes, I think there's definitely stuff we can learn from how the bike hire scheme has worked around Edinburgh, whilst it didn't work in Edinburgh. They've got some of the same issues we had, but somehow they've been able to solve them with a different approach. So that was this week. So stepping back, though, as new Transport Convener, what we're trying to do is change the narrative a little. And Martin, I don't know, Martin, I actually meant I should play the video at the start, but this is maybe a good time to press play on the video. I'm slightly nervous given the start we had to the IT situation. Where is the camera anyway?
Sure.
Over the next 10 years, you'll see a transformation in Edinburgh city centre, with major improvements making it safer and easier for everyone to get around. Along with making it better for walking, wheeling, cycling or using public transport, we're creating vibrant and comfortable public spaces where you can enjoy shopping, meeting friends, or just stopping to take in the beautiful architecture around you. Here's how we're connecting Edinburgh from west to east and up to the meadows through the city centre. Roseburn is really well connected to walking and cycling routes from the west and the north of the city. This new, safe and easy route will take you even further through Haymarket to Charlotte Square, along some of our busiest streets. Cycle safely along the protected cycleway for most of the route. Use the new crossings and junctions, which give priority to pedestrians and cyclists. And the public areas at Roseburn, Haymarket and Randolph Place will be much nicer to spend time in. From Charlotte Square, you'll be able to cycle straight along the centre of George Street to St Andrew's Square, or stroll along the widened pavements. Stop at an outdoor cafe or a landscaped seating area and take in the rich architectural heritage of the first new town.
From St Andrew's Square, we pick up on the city centre west to East Link again, where you'll be able to cycle from George Street to Picardy Place and on to Leith Walk. Turning from George Street into Hanover Street, you can travel through Edinburgh's beautiful Old Town. Take in some of the city's most spectacular sights as you walk, wheel or cycle to the meadows. These are just 3 of the projects we're delivering which will help us achieve our ambitious net zero climate change target by 2030. We're investing over £500 million in improving public transport and active ways to travel across the city centre, making Edinburgh better for everyone, for generations to come. Find out more, www.edinburgh.gov.uk/Future Edinburgh. Over the next 10 years, you'll see a transformation in Edinburgh's city centre, with major improvements making it safe.
Okay, can I start again?
You can clap if you want.
So I really like that video because it's really ambitious and it's really positive, and it's a video that you could show to someone who's never been to Edinburgh to see that the kind of transformation we have planned for the city. And it's not just about cycling, it's about well-being, it's about placemaking, and it's about the economy, and it's about the environment, and it's about climate change. And I think that is how we're trying to change the narrative. I think over the last 5 years, we've wasted too much time in an endless debate about cars versus bikes. And then really what we have to do is just make the bold argument, an ambitious argument, for moving towards a more sustainable transport system in the city and the city region. And that video, I think, is a really important part of that narrative. And I have to be honest and say I didn't ask for that video. That video was produced by council staff, and I'm really pleased by it when I seen it actually, and almost immediately put it on my social media because I was so happy with it. And the response to it has been really good. We didn't get the quite often people resist this kind of change, as people resist all kinds of change in their lives, but the response to this has been really good because it makes the argument for change in that really positive style, and it shows that we're ambitious for our city and it's about our economy, etc. And I think this is a really good way of presenting things. And we shouldn't be afraid of being ambitious for our city as well. And the other thing about the video, well, there's 2 things about the video, well, 3 things actually, is the CC Well project is, it's been delivered on the ground now. And the really good thing about that is people can see it, they can go along and look at it, and they can think about how that would look where they live. And so for me, that's going to be the exemplar for what we do. Now, there's been challenges about getting it to this stage, and there's still challenges with the support that's, some businesses are finding it quite difficult around the works, but we're learning from that, and there's still an ongoing debate there. But for us, or for me, this is the exemplar for the quality of design, the quality of placemaking, and about how that's more than just a cycle route through an area. It's about transforming the area as well and making it a better place to be. And it's delivering so much more than just that cycle route. So I think that's one of the things I want to take away from that. So the exemplar. The other thing is you could see that we were brave enough to mention Picardy Place and Leith Walk, but not actually show pictures of it. So there's some in there. And the third thing is that for the 3 schemes on that video, I think I'm right in saying that all 3 of them started life before the start of the last administration, so before the 2017-22 administration. So whilst these are fantastic projects, and some of them are just artist illustrations just now, some of them are still being designed. The George Street project, the design's not anywhere near complete yet. The rate of progress has been slow, and we have to speed that up. And it's not just about. We don't want to lose any of the quality in the speeding up of the process, but we do have to keep on top of these projects and try our best to make sure they're delivered on time and on budget. Because there's a massive conveyor belt of projects coming, and these have to move much more smoothly, certainly than CCUL has, but obviously there's particular issues there. Yeah, so in terms of the narrative, so yeah, it's about being positive, it's being bold, you know, for our investment in public transport and active transport, about making that positive change. And it's also about being honest with people about the challenges we face as a city. And it's also about listening to people as well. So that's why I'm here tonight. I'm down in Portobello on Monday night. I've spoken to the community around CCUL. I went to quite a busy meeting there where we had really good discussions. You know, some people are unhappy, but most people think things are moving in the right direction, which is good. I'm meeting people in the grass market at the end of the month to talk about issues there. I've been dealing with businesses on George Street to talk about some of the challenges, businesses on St Andrew's Square. So it is much more about meeting people, listening to them. We tell them what we're trying to achieve, they tell us what they want, and then we work together with them. So that we're just really trying to change how we're taking the city forward. But every time I have one of these conversations, what I talk about, and I'm really glad that David mentioned these points at the start, we talk about the 30% reduction in traffic kilometres, we talk about net zero by 2030, that ambition, and also our desire to cut congestion. And what's really good is people are starting to get this message, they're starting to get fed up with me talking about it, and the more people get fed up with me talking about it, that tells me that people understand what we're trying to achieve. So we're not doing these things just for the hell of it, or to make life difficult for people. We're doing it for specific reasons, and they're good reasons as well. And I think, hopefully, people are coming with us. And above all, I want to come back to the CCUL situation. Above all, we want to move the whole transport activity from the planning phase to the delivery phase. You know, and I got pelters for this right at the start when I took up the convenership. I said this: we had to spend less time planning and more time doing. And I got criticism for that because I was saying I wasn't going to have any more of these big ambitious plans anymore. And then, so when I started saying I was going to develop plans for things like the circulation plan, which I'll come back to in a few minutes, people said, oh, he just wants to plan, he doesn't want to do. But the reality is we have to do both. But I really want us to start to measure the scale of our success by the scale of our delivery. So, one of the first meetings I had with the team looking at delivering the active travel projects, and they spoke about our active travel investment programme next 5 years, £120 million. I've had meetings with Sustrans to make sure that money's still available, despite the overall cuts which are coming to the public sector in Scotland and the rest of the UK, it seems. And that money is still there. And part of the conversation, they're saying, well, our active travel investment plan is only £120 million. Glasgow, it's much bigger. Their plan is, however big it is, I can't remember. And I said, well, I'm not interested in how big the plan is. And I didn't say it in quite such a confrontational way because I respect these people. I'm interested in our delivery. So I would much rather talking about how many millions of pounds we're spending in delivery every year, rather than how big the stack of plans we've got for delivery at some point in the future. We should be talking about how many kilometres of bus lanes, bike lanes, how many drop curbs we're dropping each year, rather than talking about what plans we have for change. So between now and Christmas time, we will start setting out what we hope to do. What this all has to fit within is the council, this minority administration, has to establish a business plan. So my business plan just now is the Labour Party manifesto, but there's only 13 out of 63 of us in the council. So with the other parties, we have to establish what the council is going to do over the next 5 years of the administration. So that should come to council in December. But for that to happen, and for it to happen well, and for it to get it into the shape we want it to get into, all the parties have to enter into a constructive dialogue with us to make this happen. So parties, if if parties want to change the city, if they want to have a say on how the city shapes and forms over the next 5 years, on any of the aspects that councils does, the parties have to engage with that conversation around the business plan. And still, what we're seeing is from the election, some people are reluctant to engage in that process, but that is the way forward, is for us to work together on these things. So that'll come in December. In the build-up to that, coming through tech, there's some big Transport and Environment Committee, there's some big pieces of work. So we'll see the Road Safety Action Plan coming back. It's out of date now. I think 2016 was its last update. So that'll be quite important for people in this room and everyone in Edinburgh, really. We'll also have the Public Transport Action Plan. That was last updated in 2013, believe it or not. I was looking at its KPIs there. It's not even clear to me they've been met, but hopefully we'll get a solid assessment of that. It's going to come with the biggest expansion in public transport we've seen this century. It's only 2022, of course. And that will be the new tram line, which I spoke about earlier. I've already spoke about publicly. There's two quite speculative elements in that. That is reopening the southern subline and also a ferry link to Fife. Now, we put these in, and I argued for these to be in, and I won't give away any confidences. But we put these in really just to show the scale of our ambition. So they were speculative, and we thought, right, we'll put these in and let's see what can be done. Let's see if they are workable. And there was some cynicism about it and some pessimism as well. But what we're finding is early discussions with key stakeholders, the people that own the railway line, basically, I won't mention them by name, around the southern sub, it's not looking like it's definitely going to happen, but it's looking like it's much more positive than we expected. And so it may well be that the next time we're here, maybe a few years, Kirsty will come here by train. You never know, from Portobello. And the other thing
I think I'll still be on my bike.
sorry. And the other thing is the ferry. So again, speculative, but it seems that in the space of a few months, we've now got two companies who are interested in running that ferry company. And one of them is already shared information with me about the design of ferry and where he's going to procure them from. So again, it's something that was quite speculative and something that just seemed, something that helped us measure the scale of our ambition is actually looking like it could actually happen. So this has taught me that sometimes it pays to be ambitious and it pays to push the limits of what you think might be possible. And even if these things don't happen, I think it's worth us trying to see if they can work. So that'll be in the Public Transport Action Plan. We'll also have the Active Travel Action Plan will come before Christmas as well. Again, it's out of date. It was last revised in 2016. It's got, I think it's got Leslie Hines' picture on the inside cover, and it went out of date in 2020. So we'll revise that as well. The big thing which is coming to the next Transport and Environment Committee is the circulation plan. And what that will do for the city is it will establish routes. Well, I'll look at all roads in the city, all the roads, etc. in the city, all the public transport routes, active transport routes, and we'll look at the interaction between them. And that will let us see, which arterial routes in the city we can put bus lanes on, we can put cycle lanes on, what are the secondary routes. And that will come Transport Committee, next Transport Committee in a kind of outline form, then it will come back in December, something a bit more solid, and then it will go to consultation next year. And that's going to be a really big piece of work. So that will establish the key routes through the city, establish which routes are active travel routes, where we see public transport as being the key issue there, or the key use there, and also we'll look as well at the movement of goods and services around the city. And as part of that, we'll be looking at things like taking a more interventionist approach around deliveries to businesses, looking at time deliveries, which we already have in some parts of the city centre, to establish, to keep thoroughfares open for public transport and active transport. We have to have more of those time deliveries in the city, and that's something that we'll look at. We'll move towards school streets being the default for all schools in the city. They won't be possible for all schools in the city, but we'll move that. The circulation plan should move it towards them being the default in all schools in the city. Once we establish what the key routes are through the city for, I think, for public transport in particular, these will encapsulate, obviously, the public transport network will encapsulate areas of residential. And so as a first step, those encapsulated areas, which are surrounded by a public transport loop, that'll be the starting point for, I don't like using the phrase, but that'll be the starting point for LTNs in the city. So we'll establish that key network. Where they encapsulate areas, they then start to become our first point for looking at LTNs. So this is a really ambitious plan. Another thing that will happen is within this plan, we will recognise that people should have a reasonable expectation of, if they own a car, of being able to park it near their home. But people will have to accept that they don't have a right to be able to park it outside their house. And that's about, as we go forward, looking at how we manage parking in the city to make sure public transport and active transport as well, of course, can keep moving. I was speaking to a councillor this morning from Midlothian, and he was making a point that his bus is always delayed in Gilmerton because of parked cars. And if that is the case, really that's not acceptable, that a stationary car which might be sitting there for hours or days is holding up buses. And that's the kind of thing we have to address if we're serious about this city growing 50,000 houses over the next 10 years. We can't keep on growing the way they are without making some of these changes if we want people to be able to move around the city. And the key thing here is of course, is that in our ambition to reduce car use, the car kilometres, by 30% by 2030, we still need those journeys to happen, because a lot of those journeys are about the economy. Am I talking too much, Martin? Yeah, sorry. A lot of those journeys are about the economy, and they're also about people's well-being, about meeting relatives, meeting friends, going for cups of coffee and stuff like that. So, but it's just about people doing those journeys differently. So we still want those journeys to happen, but perhaps just in a more sustainable form. Just two more things. So parking. So parking is really important. So we get that. Well, a really important thing to understand. Well, sorry, I didn't mean that quite so patronisingly. Is that every car journey in the city starts and stops with a car parking space. So a key way of hitting our targets around net zero and reducing car kilometres in the city is to manage parking differently. So the last Transport Committee, they agreed to let officers review parking policy in the city, and that should come back before the end of the year. And I think what we're going to see is something that's probably quite radical, and something which will really, probably the biggest review of parking since the last time we reviewed parking, I don't know. But it's going to be big, and we're going to look at a lot of detail about how we use that as a tool to move people to sustainable modes of transport, and also how we use it as a tool to ensure our key public transports through the city, public transport routes through the city are kept open. I get sick of people telling me that buses are stopped by parked cars. So we're going to look at the limits of the law in terms of enforcement. So one of the issues is around, just now, people are allowed 5 minutes to park on WL lines if they're unloading. They're allowed 10 minutes, I think, if it's a larger vehicle. We're going to look to see if we can reduce those times so the parking attendants can more readily issue tickets to people who are obstructing bus lanes, etc., and active travel routes where that's the case. So in terms of some of the media coverage this meeting was talking about our manifesto, so I want to touch on that very briefly. So we do have a commitment to increase spend on active travel, and of course we are committed to do that. The early targets for that spend is before the end of the year, we'll see some plans coming forward for home to school travel, and we hope to use that money, if it becomes available, to inject into that process to really accelerate the rate of change there. And I think that's really important, because that's about stopping a lot of those, making it easier for people to walk and cycle to school, rather than using cars for those very short journeys. So I think that's really important. It's a trivial thing, but we're also going to use it to, it's trivial but very important, as I've seen through some of the cases I've dealt with. We're going to really turbocharge the rate at which we're installing drop curbs around the city. There's thousands and thousands of these things which are making life more difficult for people every single day. So that's another priority for us. And another priority will be looking at gaps in the cycle network to see where we can join together those legs of the cycle network to make them more efficient, because I think the network point of a cycle network is really important. They have to be better connected. So with that, I'll cut short what I was going to say now, since Martin's making hand signals at me. But the point I want to make, though, is and Kirsty was right to flag up that I was talking about more than cycling, because I think these things are connected. And we're talking this morning in Sestran about making, shifting between one mode and another as part of making that big trip should be easier and easier. And that's very much the way we're looking at this. And it's very much about moving people from unsustainable modes of transport to sustainable modes of transport. And we're really ambitious for this. But it does come back to the point I was making earlier about the increase in funding on active travel, is all this does come at a time when public sector funding is being squeezed. And I have to say this, of course, this is one of my other messages I repeat all the time, is we're expecting the council's budget next year to be cut by between 60 and 70 million pounds, which is a non-trivial amount of money. And in 5 years' time, we're expecting it to be around 150 million pounds lower than it is just now. So we shouldn't pretend that that scale of reduction in public spending isn't going to impact on transport in some way. But within that, we still do have a commitment to increase spending on active transport and public transport, because really we can't afford not to invest in these things because of the points that David was making right at the start around the River Idris in Pakistan, the climate change issue. But also it's about our economy as well. The growth of the city, 50,000 houses or so over the next 10 years. We're already the most congested city in the UK. We cannot drive our way out of those problems. We really have to change how the city is evolving and growing. And transport is a key part of that. So is the way we develop, but transport is an absolute key part of that.
Thank you, Scott.
Hi, can I just butt in quickly? We've got time for questions now until about 9:20. We want to finish the meeting by 9:30. There will be a small amount of time afterwards to vacate the music, vacate the venue, but hopefully we can be out by about 9:45, 9:50, something like that. We don't have any questions as yet from online viewers. If we do, I'll bring them over to you, Kirsty, but okay. We have had some submitted by email already, and I'll leave it to Kirsty to throw the meeting open. Thank you.
Okay, just allow me to make a 1-minute observation. It's partly sort of in response to do you mind if I call you Scott instead of Councillor Arthur?
I've been called worse.
Right. So because I'm on crutches at the moment, because I fell off my bike a couple of weeks ago, I'm not cycling around the city. Today I used a bus for the first time in several months, actually. And I came from Slateford back to Portobello by bus. And what I noticed on the two buses that I was on were that there were lots and lots of people on those buses with sticks and mobility aids, and also people with pushchairs and babies. And those buses were horrifically slow. And so the people that were being caught up in too many cars were disabled people or people without other options. And so, there's a real equality issue there. That trip would have taken me about 30 minutes on my bike, and it took an hour. I also had to get a taxi here from Portobello because by then I was too tired to get on another bus. It cost £20 to come here from Portobello, and again it took about nearly 50 minutes, and it would have been 25 minutes on a bike. So we need to sort out buses purely from an equalities perspective, if nothing else. So, is David French in the room? So I've got the first question No, the first question is from him, and I think it ties into what Scott had talked about in terms of the Sestran regional strategy and the focus on traffic reduction target and low carbon, and what you alluded to, and I agree with you actually in terms of major parking restrictions being a really good way to restrict traffic in an urban area. So his question was, are you aware of any cities in the world which have successfully reduced car kilometres by more than 10% without stick-type policies, in addition to the carrots?
Well, I mean, what I would say about that is that so the Sestran plan, what it says is and I agree with it, is that in order to achieve behavioural change, people have to have alternatives. And I've said this publicly already. So what we're doing just now is there's significant investment going into reallocating road space as you come into Edinburgh, arterial routes from the west, south and southeast. So this is about basically establishing bus lanes. And so that is making the choice available to people. By 2025, that extra capacity will be there. There'll be non-trivial additional bus lane capacity coming into the city. And then once we get to that stage, people will have the alternative. So at that stage, I've been clear about this, we will look at a congestion charge to bring it in. So that really, we'll put the bus lane in place. Expectation is that some people will uptake, others may not. And then so if it comes to it, we'll look at a congestion charge for around the city. So that's, so 2025 is when we think we'll be at that stage. But the congestion charge itself isn't part of Sestran. But what I would say is that some people look at congestion charge as a way of raising income for Edinburgh, but I think the people who are paying the charge are people from outside Edinburgh. So it makes sense to me, and I've been clear with, well, I shouldn't talk in those terms, I've said to officers that I believe that if we are going to introduce a congestion charge for people coming into Edinburgh, at least some of that money has to be spent on making it even easier for people to use public transport to come into Edinburgh, because that is the change we want. You know, we've got all, there's two targets for me in terms of reducing the car kilometres. There's the people who are commuting into Edinburgh who we want to use public transport. And there's also the people who are making these short trips inside the city. So that's really why I'm talking about the home to school much more. But the difficult thing here is, of course, is cost of living crisis just now. I mean, there'd be some reluctance from people around that, and I get that. Another issue is we'd be introducing a congestion charge at a time when bus fares are going up and train fares are going up. So really, it's one of these things where we will probably act in isolation with this, but really we need a national policy of making, public transport easier, cheaper, and better to use. And so there's a bit of push and a bit of a pull, and the congestion charge is pushing people onto public transport, which is hopefully cheap and efficient. But just now that joined up piece isn't there, and that's one of the challenges. And
I'm going to stop you there. Actually,
yes,
yeah.
Please do.
Right,
please do.
So we'll go from. So what I'll do is take a question from the floor, and then I'll go. If you've sent in a question, don't ask me from the floor because I'll ask your name. And I'm going to start. Is there a woman that's got a question? Because I always like to give women an opportunity. Okay. I can't. Yeah, right down the back, Rosanna.
I'm coming with the mic, and perhaps you could keep your questions quite short so that we can
no
get through as many as
speeches
possible.
or sales. Thank you.
Simple question. Why is the low emission zone not bigger?
Well, I found it an interesting thing this week, and it might not be true, so please forgive me, but part of the reason is Holyrood Park, because Holyrood Park is a private road. So the LEZ, the road going through Holyrood Park is private. So that couldn't be part of the LEZ. So because apparently, if it wasn't for that, it would have been slightly bigger. But I think, forget I said that because that might not be true. But but I think most of us believe that the LEZ perhaps isn't big enough and isn't really doing the right thing. I think I would much rather it focused on the highest emitting vehicles in terms of CO2 as well, because instead it's just really based on particulates. And so I think we should be looking at the highest emitting vehicles in terms of CO2. And there was something else I was going to say that was quite insightful, but I've lost it a bit. But yes, but I think most people would agree with you that it's not quite the fit, but it is a start. Yeah, the other issues, of course, is what it is based on is the Euro status of the vehicle. And one of the challenges there is the Euro status data for the ANP cameras isn't the easiest thing to access. There's all sorts of issues about accessing that data from the DVL database just now, which we will get. But if they're based it on CO2 emissions, that data is more or less publicly available. You could put any car's registration number into DVLA's website and it will give you that data. So perhaps it should have been based on that. Rather than particulates, it should have been based on CO2. And looked at the geographical boundaries. I mean, there is no, and what I don't like is as a suburban, councillor, my ward is Fairmile Head, is that it's not really going to do much for the polluting vehicles driving through my ward. It's going to be really good for the city centre and the area around the city centre, but in suburban areas, less so, but I think, it's easier for me to criticise because I wasn't part of that decision-making process, really. But I think it is a start. It is a start, and I think everybody accepts that the LEZ is going to evolve through time, probably in terms of the vehicles that it targets. As vehicles get cleaner, you would expect the LEZ to become, more aggressive in how it targets vehicles, and I expect it will change shape as well. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Thank you. Jodie, do you want to ask a question about the Pride Bridge? Yeah, and if you could just keep it quite a short, please, no speeches or I'll cut you off.
You're giving me a microphone. Hi everyone. I live on the border of Newhaven and Leith, and there's a bridge across North Fort Street, which is a historical bridge. It's been there forever, longer than me. I'm only a couple of years in. And they've closed the bridge and they've put up a big concrete wall at one end and said that we can't use the bridge because it's not safe underneath where the cycle path goes by. There's an arch that's damaged. So there's going to be a meeting next month, is there, about the future of the bridge? Is that right?
Yeah, it's part of the Transport Convener.
And is there any way that we can contribute to that meeting? Because we're very passionate about this community space and this active travel space in our community.
Well, what I would say is that, of course you can. So if you're a group, you can come along and... Sorry? Well, then you have to get together with fellow residents and call yourself Friends of Pride Bridge or something. That's what happens. And you can come along. You can come along and speak to the committee. I think is it 2 days in advance you make it? You
2
register?
days.
2 days in advance you come along and speak. Yeah. I mean, that bridge, you probably know the reason the wall has been built on the bridge is because previously the bridge is unstable. So there was a barrier put across the bridge and it was welded in place just for public safety. And somebody came along with a mechanical cutter and cut through that. And so that's a non-trivial thing. It's criminal damage, basically, and it's putting people at risk. So a temporary wall, which is made out of the kind of blocks that are used at the side of the road sometimes to stop vehicles from going off the road, has been put in place to stop people from crossing the bridge because it is dangerous. The bridge itself is, I've seen some of the survey pictures, it's really seriously corroded. There's different options for securing the bridge's future. All of them come at a cost. And some of the options would involve sealing off the spans of the bridge, which would block the active travel route, essentially. That's perhaps a very pessimistic way of looking at it, but that's one way of saving the bridge is to block off the active travel route below it. Well, that would do it, but of course that's not acceptable, so that won't really be considered. But the bridge itself, so I've just become Transport Convener. There's been problems with this bridge for a long time. It probably would have been cheaper and impossible to save the bridge in 2017 at the start of the last administration. It would have been even cheaper in 2012 at the start of the administration before that. But right now, it's looking like quite expensive. It really is seriously corroded, really seriously corroded.
So I think...
£3,000 has been spent closing that bridge, and it feels like a lot of money.
Well, it's going to cost way more than that to demolish it.
Yeah.
The demolition costs are high.
I think we don't want to speak about this for too long because we've only got limited time. But what we can do is explain to you how to do the deputation at the end of the meeting. So if you come and chat to me, I'll explain how to make that happen. Thank you. Yeah. Do we have any questions on the active travel action plan? Does anyone have? Because that's of a big interest in terms of what's in it. Is the question about that? No.
I'm a instructor. Something I'll come back on. I looked at that bridge with Councillor. You need a microphone.
I don't want to spend too much time on this bridge.
And I've dealt with bridges like that, building cycle routes for sustrains. And I'm an engineer. And the centre span is in an absolutely atrocious state. That's why it's fenced off with Harris fencing, but people are taking the Harris fencing down all the time. The steelwork is corroded, it's laminating, it's falling apart. The two side spans are actually better off because in the 1930s they were concrete encased. And to deal with that, we've dealt with it before. I've dealt with it in bridges in Paisley, cast iron bridges. You put an Armco culvert in, you fill in over the Armco culvert, and you can do that with that bridge, a lot cheaper than all the other options. So I think we need to look seriously at those things. I'll come back on other things because I'm a disruptor, and the thing that Scott Arthur is actually interested in, I will make a point. The city, around 50% of the hard pavement in this city, which is used for moving traffic, all traffic, is actually not used for moving traffic. It's used for parking cars, it's used for other things. And 500 car parking spaces is approximately 1 hectare. 1 hectare of absorbent reinforced grass, which can be driven on, but not used as a regular pavement, will hold back 5,500 cubic metres of water and rainfall and sort some of your problems of flooding out. And likewise, roads, as they are in older towns and cities, can be designed to go underwater. A 7-metre wide road, a 7.5 metre wide single carriageway road will carry a huge amount of water running a foot deep in water, and you can still drive through it.
Okay, what's the question?
I think we need to sort of shake things up. I did a report in
I want questions, not speeches.
In 1998, I did a report.
Right, if you haven't got a question, you have to stop.
About the infirmary, and the infirmary proposed a 15-foot high fence. Can you stop?
Yeah. So if you can come back to me if you've got a question, okay? But there is some interesting ideas that you might want to talk about after that, but talk to me later. Right, so do we have any questions on... Yeah, so the question... Yeah, active travel, yeah.
Thank you. Active travel to me includes walking, and I'd like to talk about its a specific example, but also in general. I live near Toll Cross. Now, if you want to cross the road whilst walking at Toll Cross, there are many green men you have to wait for. And I was wondering, does the council and your active travel have a policy of stopping all the traffic at junctions, which happens at some junctions, so you can just walk across? Or do we have to do it step by step by step?
It's a very good question.
So, the challenge we face, of course, is just the sheer volume of traffic in the city, and so I understand the point you make. A lot of these things, I do hope that if we get to this 30%, these things will become much more possible. But as it stands just now, if we were to take that kind of approach, it may well be that at that junction it could work. But then all it does is delay. And I don't want to talk about private cars, but let's talk about public transport and goods and services. Some of these junctions are so finely balanced that adding a few seconds, it just creates bigger delays for these different vehicles. We want to come into the city to service businesses, and we want to bring people in. So absolutely, I get your point. And Living Streets make a point that and I think this is something that's always stuck with me, is when it comes to pedestrian crossings and traffic lights, etc. Quite often we talk about reallocating road space, and the point was made there about parking space, about reallocating road space, whether it be to cycling or to public transport in terms of bus lanes. But what we also have to do is reallocate time. And that's what's happening there, is that, you know, at that junction, I know the junction you mean, but that would be about reallocating time from drivers to pedestrians. So Tollcross is a very busy junction, but when I was out with Living Streets, it was in Newington somewhere, I forget the junction, but we were at a similar junction where the same thing was happening. And at this junction, there was more pedestrians waiting to cross than there was people in cars queuing up. And that told me that the balance there was wrong. And that was where the Living Streets person made that point. He says we need to reallocate time as well as space. So that's a point well made. And off the back of that conversation is why we're looking at green person priority pedestrian crossings in the city over the next year. And so that'll be a pedestrian crossing, which is just set green man all the time until a car comes along, then it'll go to a red man. So it's flipping, because just now we go, it's at red, and we press the button for green. Green pressing priority is the opposite. It'll be the green man until a car comes along. So we are looking at it. It's something we're looking at. But I can't promise anything for Tollcross, I'm afraid, but it is something we're looking at. But thanks for coming. Thanks for mentioning pedestrians, obviously, because everyone here, I guess, is a pedestrian. And the vast majority of people in the city are, and we shouldn't forget that. And Edinburgh, ultimately, it's a great city, but it's not a huge city. It's a very walkable city, but it needs to be improved for everybody to make those journeys easier, I think.
Thanks, Scott. Is Peter Green in the audience? So you had a question about the reinforcing pedestrian cycle priority.
Yeah, and it kind of ties in with the question there about pedestrians. As was mentioned in your video there, the junction changes to make it safer for pedestrians and cyclists. With the priority changes in the highway code, would it be possible for every time that a junction's been worked on, either the road or the pavement, for it to be remarked out to show that pedestrians and people going straight on have priority over cars? Could it be something that becomes a council policy?
Right, so this is something we've looked at. So I'm not talking about, so there's a separate project looking at marking side streets, if I can call them that, with zebras, just informal zebras. So there's a separate project looking at that, but it's looking at it on non-public roads, because there's issues with the law, I forget if it's UK or Scottish government, about having those informal pedestrian crossings. But so I have also looked at this issue you're talking about signing these junctions, progressively in the way you're talking about as we update them. But and what I would say is that the road safety team rightly is quite conservative around a lot of these things, and I don't mean it's a criticism, but that can sometimes be something we do have to push back against sometimes, just to make sure that we are doing the right thing. But around that specific issue, what they say is if we sign a junction to make it really clear to drivers that that's how they should behave at that junction, drivers would then think, well, that's a special junction where we have to do that, and then at other junctions they might think they don't have to. Whereas the reality is they should be doing it at all junctions, and I get that. So really, so that is the response we got to that, and that was around the street which Martin raised actually. Was it Brunswick Street or Brunswick? Was it Brunswick Street? So we did talk about specific signage there, but they were reluctant to do so because it would then signal to drivers that was a special junction and they don't have to do it elsewhere. So, but I think, well, I was going to say hopefully people are coming to terms with that change, not specifically at that junction, but I think it'll take time. But it's a good point. It's a good point.
So, just so to follow up on that, I mean, I sometimes stand at side streets and observe drivers, and I see absolutely no one, almost no one, understands this new rule. And, so is there, I mean, obviously the council has limited resources, but is there a role for the council to undertake some sort of education campaign or to push this much harder in Edinburgh? Because the message clearly hasn't got out nationally. We see it everywhere,
So that's a good point. I mean, I've got a feeling we have done something or are doing something, but I can take that as an action. It doesn't cost us anything to promote these things on social media, etc. That's not an issue.
Yeah. Any other questions on pedestrian issues? To anyone else? Angus, do you want to ask? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, hi. I have a significant concern about the kind of mismatch between the kind of positive noises around the development of the new active travel program and then ATAP and so on. The kind of disconnection between that and the 2030 climate and net zero commitments, and the kind of what feels like a really kind of worrying lack of detail about the kind of roadmap to kind of get to that 2030 kind of goals in terms of sort of actually constructing the cycle network on the ground and kind of making those changes to the public transport system in time. So if you look at the city mobility plan, it makes a kind of a lot of really positive kind of ambitious commitments about mass cycling on arterial networks by 2030. And there's a lot of really good stuff in there, but there's almost no detail about how we get from here to there. And specifically, there's almost no detail about the kind of level of delivery that we'd need to actually get to those goals by 2030. So there just seems to be like goals and aspirations and a mix of projects now captured in the current active travel action investment plan and then, you know, potentially the new ATAP, but no kind of structured process to get from one to the other. And that seems like a very dangerous gap to have. And as the kind of leader of transport in the city, if I was you, that would be keeping me up at night.
So what's the question?
Sorry, the question is, at what point will there be a much clearer and detailed roadmap to get us from 2022 for the next 8 years to get us to 2030? When's road user charging will be considered? When will the kind of new ATAP be implemented on the ground? You know, how well and thoroughly is it understood the kind of likely mode shift that will happen as a result of that network? You know what I mean? Because otherwise we're likely to get to kind of 2026 or 2027 with, you know, those net zero targets being 1 million miles off and not enough time to do anything. So we actually need to understand that kind of structured process now to have a meaningful chance of kind of getting there.
So I mean, this is an important point. I mean, the wide, so there's a number of moving parts here. So the wider net zero, and it's important to be really clear about this, is that we are absolutely committed to delivering the net zero by 2030. Okay, we're absolutely committed to, and in our, we have, you know, I talked earlier about the business plan for the council over the next 5 years. That's one of the red lines, is delivering net zero. I don't know if that's a secret actually, but hopefully we don't get in trouble. So that's one of our red lines, you know, and so it's like, you know, tackling poverty, etc. So it's right up there. It's a big thing. But council officers have been really clear with us. Is the last administration, the 20 by net 30, was very clearly an ambition. It wasn't this will happen. It was an ambition. But we want to make it happen. The biggest threat to net zero not happening isn't me. It's the funding cuts which are coming to the council, because they make it harder, and this is not from us, this is what the council officers say to us, they make it harder for us to make some of the long-term decisions we have to make to hit net zero. And that's not so much about transport, that's about the changes we have to make to the council's buildings, etc. But all these things are connected together. In terms of, you know, the delivery of net zero, I mean, the stuff that's happening around reallocation of road space into the regional arterial routes into the city, the bus lanes I was talking about earlier, the plan for a new park and ride in West Edinburgh. People don't know about it, but it's going to be transformative. And I shared videos recently, and I think spokes were kind enough to share them again. These will be transformative changes when they get delivered. If you Google the Edinburgh Active Travel Investment Programme, you'll see £120 million worth of active travel projects, and there's there's dates against all those projects. The vast majority are running behind schedule just now, but there's dates against them all, and quite a lot of them should have started by now, but they've not. Once we get to the Public Transport Action Plan and the Active Transport Action Plan, for the projects, there will be dates there taking us up to 2030, without a doubt, you know. And including big things like, you know, where the tram project, there'll be dates for that as well. I'm looking forward to see the dates for that, actually. So you wanted to correct me, I think, or...
I think do you mind if I just stop it there, and then if there's time at the end, we can, come back to it. So sort of a wee bit sort of connected to that. Is Andy Follis in the audience?
Yeah, I am, but I think my questions are more points to give to Scott to take away rather than...
Was that about the planning, the city development plan?
Well, one of the things, one of the points is the city development plan is full of great ambitions, but we see an awful lot of the time things going well into the development plan, things going well into strategic plans, but then when developments actually happen, the developers don't actually implement them because it's a different set of officers that are looking after checking that the implementation is done correctly than is those who are setting the strategy. And it's asking whether you can get your enlarged active travel team to have a role in development control part of the job to make sure that when schemes are being moved from in principle permission to the detailed design, the things that you've put through on the strategy actually come through into reality.
Well, I mean that's a good point, and I'll be honest, as the new Transport Convener, I don't really understand the interface in the council between those teams. Obviously, I don't want the person who leads on the whole, the city mobility plan implementation. She really understands the interface between planning and the active travel element. So I'm hopeful that she's got oversight of this. But this is simple, these new developments, they should design their developments in accordance with cycling by design, which is a national standard, and it's as simple as that. And we shouldn't accept anything less. It shouldn't be about the council having its own design guidance that, the developer might interpret differently. We've got that national guidance, and they should follow that. And this isn't just about, obviously, this isn't just about cycling infrastructure. It's also about getting the walking element right, making sure that these people, as much as possible, these developments are part of 20-minute neighbourhoods, and also making sure they've got good access to public transport networks. And it's worth looking at the city plan because it's absolutely fundamental to what we're doing around the net zero thing, about moving development from being less sprawl into higher density, better connected, 20-minute neighbourhood. So it's going to change things quite a bit. Sorry.
Online questions.
All right, okay. Okay, we've
very
got...
Very subtle.
Okay, so this is a very specific question, but I think it's really important. So it's from Becky Taylor, who's asked about parking enforcement and will there be any in South Liberton Bray, and the cycle lane is often blocked. But I think we can broaden that out from beyond that specific one to people generally parking in cycle lanes. And sometimes it's because the restrictions aren't there, so they can. And sometimes there are restrictions, but they're disobeyed and we have no enforcement. And as we all know, a cycle lane is not a cycle lane if it's a parking lane. So what are you going to do about that is the question.
So thank you, Becky. I don't know where the camera is, let's go wave to you. What I'd say is that it's hugely disappointing to me that the Scottish Government missed an opportunity to make basically parking in cycle lanes illegal. That was I think it was a UK cycling campaign. I think it was Colin Smith brought it up as a bill, if that's the phrase, to the Scottish Parliament, but it was voted down, and that was hugely disappointing to me. What I would say is every time I've looked at people complaining about parking in specific places, and I don't know about Liberton Bray because I've not looked at that one, is the number of tickets issued exceeds the number of complaints that we've received from the public. So I think it's one of these things, we see cars in cycle lanes and it drives us crazy, and we never see parking attendants when we see that car in the cycle lane or the bus lane or whatever. But the reality is that the tickets are being issued. Maybe not enough of them, but the tickets are being issued. And so it is a really important issue. And there is ways to people live report parking issues. That is possible. And I always encourage people to report properly using that system rather than, because I'm guilty of this as well. You feel a lot better, you post a picture on Twitter, you say how awful it is, then you move on with the rest of your day. But really, people have to formally report these things to get the kind of action that they want. So I wrote to the Scottish Government, the Transport Minister, last week on parking, asking for parking fines to be increased. And parking fines, if we get them to increase substantially, that means it's a bigger deterrent for people, and it also means there's more money coming into the council to invest more money in parking enforcement. So it'll feed itself. And Caroline Brown, who I know she's not here tonight, she's a colleague from my day job, she suggested this thing on Twitter. She said that, well, first offence you pay the parking fine, second time we double it, and then we triple it. And that's one of the things that's in the letter we sent to the Transport Minister. Because there's people who, and I see this from my office in the City Chambers on Waverley Bridge, there's people who just see parking tickets as an expense, and I think we have to tackle that.
Good, you can clap. And this one, I mean, I am someone who could spend 40 hours a week reporting this vehicle, and I don't see why, as a citizen, I should have to do it, frankly, because it does take a lot of time. But yeah, John, do you want to? Yeah, let's get a cut.
So one of the issues there is that, and the parking officers make this point to me. He says when they get these reports, they go out and they get there. Then as soon as they get there, the person's got 5 minutes to move their car. And so as part of that parking policy review, we're going to see if we can squeeze that 5 minutes. So it's a bigger deterrent. So they know some people just look out their window and wait for the attendant to come along. They'll have to have their trainers on pretty soon to get out before the ticket gets issued, I think. And I think that's fair because the disruption this causes, and quite often parking's prohibited in places is a matter of public safety, not just to keep traffic flowing. It's a matter of public safety. So it's really important that it's enforced properly.
Question from John first.
Okay, just about you talking about letters to the Scottish Government. What's the situation with the TRO and ETRO review? What would you like to see the outcome of that? Because I know from schemes like right outside this building, George Forth Bridge, the segregated cycle lanes were removed because of the duality of having a permanent scheme and a temporary scheme. But then it also leads on to my question, well, why don't you just put a bus gate on Bank Street, and it would actually solve quite a lot of the issues without the need of the permanent scheme, which you're saying it's sitting on a shelf. When's it going to get built? How much will it cost? Surely there's a way of almost value engineering a design into to get the real effect without the cost. If the budgets are being cut and funding like workplace parking levies or stick revenue is not part of your plans.
So the situation outside. So when I cycle City Chambers, I cycle from Fairmill Head down Braid Road through the quiet route and across the meadows, and that is the worst bit. Particularly, is it Forest Road? It's called. Is it right? And my son's just started cycling again, and I came up to town with him around the time when the Queen was in St Giles, lying in state. We came up. We didn't try to get in, but just to get a feel for the atmosphere. And when we came across Long Forest Road, I said, this is the worst part, because as you're going along, cars are swinging around at the same time, and sometimes bigger vehicles, and they push you right to the edge. But I'm not entirely sure why the assets were removed from outside there. It doesn't quite stack up how we couldn't keep them there because we had this future plan, but yet we could keep Waverley Bridge closed, and we'll have a future plan there as well. And I don't think either space is used well right now. But clearly, the TRO process does have to be changed a bit. It's good that people have rights and can raise concerns, but I think when you get to the stage where the system's being gamed to hold up strategic improvements to the city, then at the very least there has to be an accelerated route for those people, for people's concerns to be heard For the delays we see, which amount to years, I don't think are acceptable. When you look at the cost to the city in terms of the economy, you know, the points we made earlier, economy, you know, well-being, climate, so it's not acceptable. But to your fundamental question, where are they at with that? I don't know. Sorry.
So I've got a sort of related question actually from Ian. Ian Owenson isn't here, is he? No. Which you sort of alluded to, Scott, when you were speaking originally, which was a sort of the tension between quality schemes and getting schemes on the road. And his question was, would the council be willing to make the difficult decision to roll out light segregation quicker rather than short sections of quality hard segregation to get more schemes on the ground?
I guess the question would be yes, but I'd be interested to know what the time and financial saving would be in the longer term, because these schemes, I mean, a big part of promoting these schemes is the consultation process, which we have to go through legally, whether it's a lightweight one in terms of the infrastructure we use, or a more substantial one. I mean, some of the spaces for people schemes we have in the city, they were cheap to install, but they're proving relatively expensive to maintain. So I'm not quite sure how the economics of that balances out. So yeah, I mean, if it balances out, it makes sense. Of course, it does.
Okay, so there's another question from online. Oh, I like this one. So Scott, what is the order of the transport hierarchy? And I'm going to follow on with, is it being implemented? That wasn't asked, I've added that myself.
Well, it's something. I mean, you'll see in the circulation plan that it's at the core of the circulation plan. You know, and I think often it's overlooked that, you know, walking and wheeling is at the top of the transport hierarchy. And in your introduction, you spoke about people with mobility issues that you'd seen on the bus. And you know, it's a big part of why it's at the top of the hierarchy to make this, you know, a more equal city. The challenge, of course, we have is the pressures between these different, even the sustainable modes. There's pressures between them. So as part of the circulation plan development, we do recognise that, and this is a really difficult subject because we do recognise that if we want high quality active travel for provision on, you know, taking us right through our city, that may well come with impacts on public transport. So that the transport hierarchy becomes quite important then when it comes to informing the decision-making process. So what we're trying to look at, and where you get those kind of conflicts, is, well, can we accept very localised delays to public transport? You know, given the amount of people who travel on buses in Edinburgh, can we accept very localised delays if it means improving safety for, you know, pedestrians and cyclists? If the overall impact is a faster route, a faster journey for bus users, so accept that, you know, the total journey from, you know, Fairmile Edinburgh in the city centre is going to be faster, but there's going to be elements of that where it'll be slower because of the active travel provision. And those are really difficult conversations to have, despite that, because the hierarchy isn't the hierarchy informs decision making, because if you take it to its extreme, we would just be walking everywhere if you say this is the hierarchy. So but where we have those conflicts is where things get difficult, and that's where the hierarchy becomes really important.
I mean, I don't want to speak for the questioner, although I do know them on Twitter, I think. But I suspect sitting in the background of this question is that what we tend to see is private vehicles jumped above most of these other levels in the hierarchy. I think that's probably where this is coming from in many areas of the city. And I guess actually you'll be in Portobello on Monday night, and I will be there as well. And I imagine that might be quite a difficult meeting. You know, where the area is completely dominated. But yeah, I suspect that's where the question is coming from, rather than those top 2-3 levels. Yeah.
So the thing that's really difficult to untangle is that, and it's a particular issue in the city centre, is that even if we were to take every private car off the road, we still have to move goods and services around the city, and obviously we still have to move public transport around as well. And so that's the thing that's difficult to untangle. And, in the Cllr strategy, it talks a lot about unnecessary journeys, or journeys that you could be undertaken more sustainably. And it is, going back to what I said earlier as well, it is about behavioural change, and it is about making people aware that there is choices for them. The choices are there. And, and it's really difficult. It is about change, and it is about, we talked earlier about carrots and sticks, but it is also about nudges, and I think that's where the things like the CPZs, which we'll be talking about in Portobello on Monday, it is about those nudges where, when it comes to the point where somebody's going to buy a car or thinking about buying a second car, they think, well, actually, is this the right decision? Is there a different way we can do it? And I know that we only bought the car we've got just now, we just got a couple of years ago, and we did think actively about, do we really need a car? Could we use a car club instead, and all that kind of thing? And I hope, and obviously we decided to buy a car, but I hope when, more and more when people are thinking about buying a new car, or thinking about buying a second car, or sometimes a third car, that they do go through that process of thinking, actually, is this the right decision for us, and for the city? Is it the right decision? And I hope they're going through that process.
Okay. I see about 5 or 6 hands up. Is it possible
to
take some from the floor?
I'm just is Tim Kirby here? So does anyone else have a question about tram safety? No. Okay. Yeah.
The plans that were developed several years ago to improve safety at the tram junctions on Princes Street in the Haymarket, obviously that some time has passed since they were developed. Are they going to be coming fairly soon? Because you did allude earlier of the difficulty between planning to do things and actually doing them.
So forgive me, I can't recall the exact timeline, but the 6 junctions along the route, in the city centre, they're on track. Forgive me because I don't know the date. But this is something I was talking about during the week. Is one of the first things I did as Transport Convener, I think it was within a week actually, as I went to the memorial service for the student who died at the top of Lothian Road. And that was 5 years ago to the date that was. And I think I'd just become convener, I think. And so that was 5 years ago at that point. And then I think around a month ago, I signed a letter to Sustrans, trying to gently encourage them to give us money to develop the design to remodel that junction. So 5 years after that young woman's death, and that woman had so much potential, we're now at the stage where we're asking for money to develop the design for that junction. And I think that's absolutely shameful. I really do. And if I was to meet her family, I could not look them in the eye and say it's taken us 5 years to get this far. And I know lots happened in that time, not least a pandemic, but I just think it's completely unacceptable. And going at the rate of change we've had over the last few years in the city, and I'm not just talking about the last administration, I'm talking about longer term. I mean, when does anybody think, if we keep on going at that rate, that the changes that we made at that junction that we need? It might be 10 years after that poor woman died that we see those changes. And so I think that's completely unacceptable. Another thing is that this is a really difficult subject, but I cycled along the tram lines around the time of the anniversary just to see the issues for myself again, because it's not a route I normally take. But so many of the markings that the council was very quick to install after that death are just completely obliterated now. There's just fragments of them. And again, that really does worry me. But I know there's technical issues about getting the markings to stick on the surfaces, etc. But it's a really difficult subject, actually. And then I see this week, I didn't know about this, the scale of the number of claims against the city as well. The whole thing is as a citizen of the city, it really does trouble me, actually. And then so trams are a big part of the future of this city, but the problem is that a lot of people who are against that, they use these accidents as a reason for not doing it. But the reality is that we know this, and I don't have to tell Kirsty this. Every day there's people getting injured in this city, and they're not on tram tracks. They're just going about their everyday lives, and they find themselves involved in an accident with a motor vehicle in some shape or form. And I just wish that some of these media reports around accidents we've seen over the tram line, over essentially what's been a 10-year period, those claims, also put it within the context of all the injuries we've had in the city, and the deaths of children in the city, because of the way that some drivers behave. So sorry for the rant there, but I think it's a really serious issue, but I just wish we had that bigger context as well.
Okay, so we'll take a question from Mies down the back. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for speaking to us. I live in South Edinburgh, and these have been really cheered with these little green cyclists advanced start things at the new traffic lights at junctions. And I wanted to say that to you because I think it makes us more visible, and we get through the junction even more easily. And I wondered what the policy is, where these are appearing, or are they going to be rolled out right through, or do you know anything about them? I just want to say they're a great idea.
So you're talking about the green light you get for cyclists, yes. So I think where they can fit within the phase, then they will be installed. I mean, that's the plan. But it comes back to the point that was made earlier about the sheer pressure on some of these junctions. I have to say, when I go up Liberton Bray, the one, I'm not sure if it's quite Liberton Bray, but when I'm going up the hill, it's not long enough for me to get across the junction anywhere near it. I'm too slow. I'm too slow.
So was that, I'll look into it and see if we can have some more.
Well, I mean, I would hope that wherever possible these things, sorry, I should have answered your question rather than just rambling. I would hope that wherever possible they are being designed, so that installed. So that's something else I can ask about. I've got another traffic light issue to raise with them, so I can speak about that at the same time.
Kirsty, do you think it would be possible just to let those, just take all the questions so that people can air them, because I'm conscious of time.
Are we conscious here? As long as they're questions and not speeches.
Yeah, so very, very short questions, everybody. Yeah. And I see about 3 or 4 hands up. Oh, more. We'll so I shall go along.
We should just take 3 together, I think. Okay. Yeah.
I just wondered if there's a bit more sort of joined up thinking, particularly with cycle parking and cycle security, and it'd be very nice to see much more cycle parking within the centre where people are going, and you see that much more on the continent, like train stations. So I just wonder what the council are sort of, how much are going to be involved in that.
We'll hold that question. Yeah.
Cycle parking.
Hi, you mentioned cycling by design earlier. And I just wonder how we ensure that that's actually happening in all new schemes. Obviously, the Leith Walk would be the classic example, but there's other new things on the ground. Even CC Well is arguably not totally compliant with it. So how do we get that level of education, I guess, with planners, engineers, all those kind of people to make sure that that's reality in all schemes?
Okay, final question, and then Scott has to answer.
We'll take 3 first, and then we can get the next lot of 3.
So we've heard about big ticket items such as the tram and regional bus lanes and so on, but there are other measures to meet your 30% miles reduction target by 2030, and that would be things like low traffic neighbourhoods, which are quick, rapid to implement, and very cheap to implement. So I would ask, what would the councillor do to roll out low traffic neighbourhoods across the city? I believe that they should be rolled out across the city rapidly, starting with the poorest areas in the city.
Okay.
So, quick responses to those if you can.
I've got a really short
memory. So we've got cycling. So cycling by design. How do you ensure that the officers use cycling by design when they're designing schemes? That's the first question.
So I think this first question was actually about cycle parking. So if there's a location where people want cycle parking, just get in touch or get in touch with your local ward councillor and I can see what we can do. I would say though, as a general rule, we have to get this off the footpath and onto the road. That's what I think. I was in Poland recently and that seemed to be the default to me. They just set aside car parking spaces and that's where people park their bikes with the normal racks and all the rest of it. But we need to get these things off the pavement. I don't know why we got into the state where we consume pavement space with these things. So both CC Well, I think, well, obviously, and also the Leith Walk, they predate the cycling by design. I'm not sure about CC Well what it's designed to, but Leith Walk is designed by the Edinburgh Street Design Guidance, which was the council's own guidance. So I think I'm right in saying that all new schemes going forward will be cycling by design. The LDAP schemes, there's one the other end of Frogston Road where I live, it's cycling by design. And the useful thing about that is it's an actual national guidance. So I'm not saying I don't have concerns with some of the detail of it, but when you speak to residents, you can say this is the guidance it's designed by. And the guidance is relatively clear for people to look at, so they can check the widths of the lanes themselves and all the rest of it. So I think it's a really useful thing. In terms of LTNs, I mean, I live in an LTN, and it's been a 20-minute neighbourhood. I've lived there for 20 years, and it's absolutely fine. So as I said earlier, circulation plan will encapsulate areas with public transport routes, and within that I think that should be the starting point for LTNs. But I've also learned from the mistakes that were made in how the council tried to promote an LTN in East Craigs. So I think we have to do it a different way. We have to work with residents and we have to listen to them and we have to address their needs. I mean, I see going forward that we're going to want to do more LTNs, but what I can't reconcile in my head is, we could choose to just make this a really top-down approach and get